In a galaxy of order, where diplomats are emotionless machines, Earth's chaotic charm threatens to unravel it all. When Zedzer Zirk, the perfect envoy, lands in vibrant New York, humanity's passion ignites an unexpected revolution. Can Earth's wild spirit conquer the stars? Dive into the story to find out. Like and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more captivating videos, and inspire us to create even more amazing content. The Galactic Diplomatic Corps was a pinnacle of precision, a symbol of interstellar order, spanning 1,200 galaxies and representing over 50,000 distinct species. It was a well-oiled machine of bureaucracy. In this colossal entity, where timelines were measured in millennia, efficiency was paramount. A perfect posture, impeccable records, and neutrality were the trademarks of its diplomats, who could mediate disputes between two warring star systems or establish trade routes for entire sectors of space with a mere flick of their fingers. Each diplomat, trained from birth, underwent 700 cycles of indoctrination. Their memory is wiped clean to ensure impartiality. They were programmed to respond to every situation with cool detachment and razor-sharp logic. Their craft, the diplomatic vessel, was a sleek, levying ship capable of translocating between galaxies in under 12 seconds, navigating the most chaotic regions of space. This advanced technology, powered by a stable fusion core and quantum entanglement, allowed them to appear in any crisis, any corner of the galaxy, in a fraction of a second. They were the masters of precision and efficiency. On the surface, the Corps embodied the ideal of diplomacy, a calm, collective force. But beneath the cold logic was a strict protocol that left no room for errors, certainly no room for humanity's chaos. When Earth was first introduced to the Corps as a potential partner 12,000 cycles ago, it was categorized as a backwater planet on the fringes of galactic importance. But now, after decades of communication and negotiation, it was becoming something else, a problem, a diplomatic enigma. Earth had not yet proven its worth in the galactic trade, nor did it possess resources of significant value. But what Earth did have was humanity, and that, the Corps soon realized, was far more powerful than any advanced technology or star-faring civilization they had encountered. At the heart of this issue was a single question: could Earth's bizarre influence be contained? The arrival of the first Galactic Diplomatic Corps' mission to Earth was nothing short of a formality, a mandatory stop in the list of newly identified planets. According to the official reports, Earth had just reached a remarkable technological milestone: spacefaring capability. In other words, humanity had managed to launch an uncrewed spacecraft into orbit using a propulsion system that still relied on combustion-based engines, an almost prehistoric concept in the eyes of the galactic elite. Diplomat Dax Fergal, the first envoy to Earth, was prepared for a planet of limited technological sophistication. However, what they encountered upon arrival was far more strange. The human cities were colossal, spanning continents, teeming with active vitae. New York City, home to over 8.4 million residents, buzzed with incessant noise, cars honking, people shouting, screens flashing with advertisements, and what appeared to be endless hordes of pedestrians walking without any semblance of order. Traffic lights, pedestrian crosswalks, and even smartphone apps used by the masses did little to contain the chaos. Technology was primitive yet oddly functional. Humans had harnessed electricity, yes, but their best form of communication across distances still relied on radio waves and fiber optics. Technology is considered obsolete by most galactic standards. Yet, it worked. Humans managed to reach all corners of the Earth using technologies that, from a galactic perspective, seemed like child's play. But what truly baffled the diplomats was the human behavior. The Earthlings seemed obsessed with bizarre concepts and a logical sport called football, which had nothing to do with feet or balls. A strange ritual called karaoke where they sang loudly and poorly for entertainment, and the widespread consumption of foods that defied galactic reason: hot dogs, pizza, and an obsession with fried chicken. The diplomats were forced to note these quirks in their reports, each more incredulous than the last. Despite Earth's chaotic nature, there was one undeniable truth. The humans had something that could not be ignored: passion. And it was this very passion that would begin to seep into the minds of the Corps' best diplomats, turning them from impartial mediators to something far more human. Upon the return of the first wave of diplomats from Earth, the Galactic Diplomatic Corps was already on edge. Diplomat Dax Fergal had been the first to report back, detailing the primitive technologies, the chaotic cities, and the baffling backwater of the humans. Yet, despite these observations, the High Commissioner Zedzer Zirk had dismissed them as mere eccentricities. After all, the Corps had faced far more challenging assignments in its 12,000 cycle history, and a planet like Earth was considered no more than a curiosity. A planet with no substantial resources and barely any technological sophistication. But when the next few diplomats returned, the Corps began to notice something strange. Ambassador Zink, a seasoned diplomat with a reputation for maintaining impeccable composure, returned with a disarming smile, a smile that rarely, if ever, graced the faces of the galactic elite. He was still unscathed physically, but his rapport was far from the sterile, precise debriefings expected by the Corps. He spoke of the human phenomenon of social bonding, how Earthlings spent hours each day engaging in social rituals that involved food, a commodity that Zink, a being of pure energy, had no use for. Yet, Zink had found himself fascinated by barbecues, events where humans stood around large, open flames and grilled meat for hours. The once cold and unemotional diplomat now detailed the sheer joy of eating alongside others. He even admitted to enjoying the camaraderie, a phrase so out of place in the rigid language of the Corps that it left Zedzer Zirk speechless. Then came Ambassador Fyra, who had been sent to Earth's Moscow, a cold, calculated city known for its strategic importance. Instead of the usual meticulous report, Fyra mentioned how human humor, jokes, laughter had taken over their sessions. Fyra had started laughing during official meetings, not out of disrespect, but because they genuinely found the humans' backwater amusing. Worse still, Fyra had adopted a new habit, using contractions in speech, a complete break from the formal diction expected by the Corps. Zix's patience were thin. "What is happening to my diplomats?" he muttered as he reviewed the reports. There were no signs of contamination, no biological triggers, no viral outbreaks. Nothing abnormal according to their scans. Yet, something was changing, something the Corps had no control over. The backwater of these diplomats was no longer dictated by logic, precision, or control. They were beginning to feel. The Corps couldn't afford to allow this to continue. Something had to be done before Earth's influence spread any further. But how could they stop it? What could resist the influence of a world so unpredictable, so human? It was clear to Zedzer Zirk that something had gone horribly wrong. The diplomats who had returned from Earth had changed in ways that defied all known regulations. The thought of sending a team back to Earth, especially now, seemed like an exercise in futility. Yet, the Corps had no choice. Earth was too unpredictable to ignore any longer. Zedzer Zirk, frustrated but determined, made the bold decision to send a final envoy. A diplomat whose genetic makeup was designed for one purpose: to resist cultural contamination. Ambassador Zedzer Zirk was the ideal choice. Born and trained in a rigid environment, Zedzer had undergone 700 cycles of discipline. They were immune to the typical human tendencies that had previously caused such issues. Zedzer was, in every sense, the perfect diplomat, a paragon of logic, structure, and decorum. Zedzer's mission was clear: to analyze Earth once more and report back on its true potential, without being swayed by its chaos. The Corps was confident that Zedzer would resist the human touch, maintaining their impartiality and authority. When Zedzer arrived in New York City, however, it didn't take long for the situation to spiral out of control. Zedzer's first impression of Earth was, frankly, overwhelming. 8.4 million people lived in Newark alone, with 60,000 cars clogging its streets each hour, and the constant hum of urban life reverberating through every alley. Zedzer had expected a planet of technological ruin, not this vibrant, pulsing mess of energy. What disturbed Zedzer most was not the disarray, but the humans themselves, their loud voices, their laughter, their physical warmth. It was also human, and there was something magnetic about it. The cold, analytical Zedzer began to feel an unsettling shift. The first crack in Zedzer's stoic armor came when they were invited to a karaoke bar. They had heard of this absurd tradition, where humans belted out poorly sung songs into microphones. But as Zedzer observed the sheer joy of the humans around them, something unexpected happened. A human, holding a microphone, laughed and urged Zedzer to join in. With a quiet sense of unease, Zedzer took the mic. It was a trivial gesture, a single, flawed note, but the laughter, the unrefined joy around them was intoxicating. Zedzer felt something. Could it be enjoyment? Could it be, for the first time, fun? Days passed, and Zedzer found themselves slowly integrating into human culture. The tactile joy of eating a cheeseburger, greasy, messy, and far below galactic standards, became an obsession. And as Zedzer sat in a stadium watching humans play baseball, a game where a simple bat hit a ball into a field for a run, the rush of collective excitement was something Zedzer couldn't ignore. The experience was foreign, yes, but also electrifying. And so it began. The more Zedzer resisted Earth's influence, the stronger it became. Humans, with their chaotic yet contagious love for life, had begun to sink their hooks into the Diplomat. The line between detachment and immersion began to blur. Zedzer felt alive. As the days went by, Zedzer's reports became less focused on the strategic importance of Earth and more on what they'd experienced, what they were now a part of. Zedzer knew it was happening, but the worst part was they didn't know if they even wanted to stop it. But the Corps was watching, and soon, Zedzer would face the consequences. The Galactic Diplomatic Corps had exhausted all other options, and now Zedzer Zirk, their most disciplined and genetically perfect diplomat, was their last hope. No being in the galaxy had been trained as rigorously as Zedzer. They had undergone 700 cycles of mental and physical conditioning, training that included resisting every form of external influence, from biological viruses to emotional manipulation. Zedzer's very DNA had been engineered for one purpose: to be impervious to any cultural contagion. Yet, when Zedzer's vessel entered Earth's atmosphere and descended toward New York City, it didn't take long for them to realize that this assignment would not be as simple as anticipated. Zedzer's advanced translocational shuttle, capable of HFY speeds in excess of 25,000 kilometers per second, landed smoothly in Central Park. But as soon as the doors opened, the sensory overload was immediate. The human city sprawled out before them, 8.4 million people, each vying in their own world, with cars honking, pedestrians hustling, and giant digital screens flickering advertisements in every direction. It was chaotic, loud, and frenetic. Zedzer stood perfectly still, absorbing the environment, measuring the data with an unflinching eye. The air was thick with pollution, the streets cluttered with vehicles, yet somehow, this was not the sterile, clinical environment Zedzer had anticipated. And then came the humans. One individual, a stranger to Zedzer, stepped forward with a wide smile and said, "Hey there, you look like you need a coffee." This simple phrase, a mere greeting to most humans, shook Zedzer to their core. Coffee. It seemed trivial, unimportant. Yet, the genuine friendliness in the human's voice was undeniable. Coffee was a stimulant, yes, but it was also a symbol of human socialization, of connection, of community. Zedzer didn't know it then, but this was the moment when their meticulous discipline would start to unravel. As the days wore on, Zedzer was thrust into Earth's daily life. Coffee shops, sports games, and even casual conversations about the weather slowly began to chip away at their emotional barriers. Earth's technology, although primitive by galactic standards, was utterly captivating in its simplicity. A smartphone, capable of connecting millions of humans instantaneously, was both archaic and impressive. And the food, pizza, tacos, and, most astonishingly, the cheeseburger, became an obsession. Zedzer had been trained to never indulge in such earthly pleasures. But now, as they picked up a cheeseburger for the first time, they couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. What was happening to them? This was no longer just an observation. Earth's influence was becoming their new reality, and Zedzer had no idea how much longer they could resist. Zedzer Zirk had seen countless galaxies, met alien species with unimaginable technologies, and navigated the complexities of universal diplomacy. But nothing prepared them for the disorienting power of Earth's culture. The cold precision of their training, the years of unwavering focus on their mission, began to crumble the moment they stepped into Newark's Broadway district. 8.5 million tickets were sold each year for Broadway shows, a testament to the human passion for theatrical art. Zedzer had been assigned to attend a performance of Hamilton, a musical that humans repeatedly described as revolutionary. Zedzer, thinking it nothing more than a theatrical production, had expected a dull, scripted performance, a mere formality to report back on. But what happened that evening was far beyond any expectations. The theater, with its 1,400-seat capacity, was alive with anticipation. The lights dimmed, and the music began. Lively orchestration, harmonized vocals, and rhythmic beats filled the air. Zedzer had studied the data. Humans loved music, but they hadn't anticipated its intensity. Each note seemed to vibrate in their core. The rhythms were infectious. The energy in the room was palpable, unlike any diplomatic event Zedzer had experienced. The humans were not just watching. They were levying the story, their emotions intertwining with the music. Zedzer, ever the observer, found themselves subconsciously tapping their foot to the beat. They tried to ignore it, but the overwhelming joy in the theater was too powerful. There, surrounded by humans laughing, clapping, and singing along, Zedzer began to feel something completely foreign. Could it be enjoyment? How could something as primitive as musical theater trigger such a reaction? The entire experience was an assault on everything Zedzer had been taught. No data could explain the visceral, emotional response they were having, but it was undeniable. Their mind tried to resist, to maintain a professional distance, but the sensation was too profound. This wasn't just entertainment. It was a fundamental human connection. After the show, Zedzer found themselves walking the streets, unaware of how they'd gotten there. The crowd outside the theater was cheering, hugging, and even dancing in the streets, celebrating the show. The world outside seemed to burst with energy, unlike the sterile, reserved existence of Zedzer's homeworld. Humans, they realized, weren't simply surviving. They were thriving in their chaos. Later, while sitting at a small diner with a group of Earthlings, Zedzer picked up a cheeseburger. The first they had tasted. The greasy, savory delight was absurd to their palate, yet the joy it brought them was undeniable. It was delicious. The combination of flavors, the messy, unrefined nature of it, was a sensory overload. But it felt right. It was everything Zedzer had been taught to avoid. The diplomatic mission had shifted. Zedzer was no longer observing Earth. They were beginning to live it. And as the cheeseburger's flavor lingered in their mouth, Zedzer knew the Corps' worst fear had come true. Earth's influence was irreversible. Zedzer Zirk knew the moment they entered the Galactic Diplomatic Corps' headquarters that something was amiss. The cold, sterile walls, once a comfort, now felt oppressive. The air, clean and clinical, no longer seemed like a refuge. It felt like a cage. As Zedzer stepped into the debriefing room, the faces of their superiors were as unmoving as ever, their expressions unreadable. But Zixviller's gaze was piercing, almost disappointed. The data had come in. Zedzer's reports, once filled with the usual impassive assessments of Earth's geopolitical status, had shifted. Slowly, over the past several cycles, they had begun to focus on Earth's culture. The vibrancy of human interaction, their obsession with food, their chaotic joy in simple pleasures like karaoke and sports. Zedzer had even begun using the informal contractions that had so disturbed their fellow diplomats. Words like gonna and wanna had crept into their speech, and worse, Zedzer had started to enjoy using them. Zixvuler, towering and unflinching, turned to Zedzer. "What happened to you? You were sent to Earth to assess its potential, not to become a part of its absurdities." The word stung, but Zedzer held their ground, unable to hide the sense of shame that was creeping in. "I believe," Zedzer began, their voice unwavering, "that I have gained a deeper understanding of Earth's diplomatic value. It is more than just trade routes and alliances. It is about building connections through shared experiences, humor, food, spontaneous moments. These things—" "No," Zix interrupted. "These things are not diplomacy. They are distractions. And you, Zedzer, have succumbed to them. You've become human." Zedzer's chest tightened. The cold realization washed over them. The Corps had suspected this would happen, and now they were right. Zedzer had crossed the line. They had become part of the very chaos they were sent to study. Despite their protests, despite the 700 cycles of training that had prepared them for everything, Zedzer was stripped of their title. The Corps' directive was clear. Zedzer was to be returned to the archives indefinitely. A century-long punishment awaited them, one that would erase any trace of their contamination. As Zedzer was escorted away, the weight of the decision pressed down on them. Their final thoughts were not of the Corps, nor of their punishment. They were of a cheeseburger, a karaoke bar, and the human laughter that had become impossible to forget. Zedzer Zirk's fall from grace had been swift, but even in exile, their influence was far from extinguished. The archives, once seen as a place for failed diplomats and forgotten reports, had become a breeding ground for something far more radical than Zedzer could have anticipated. The Galactic Diplomatic Corps had intended to break Zedzer, to remove any trace of Earth's influence from their mind. They were sent to organize historical records, sort through millennia of treaties, and catalog data from distant systems. But there, amidst the dusty relics of galactic diplomacy, Zedzer found something unexpected: freedom. With no immediate oversight and little to do but file reports, Zedzer began to quietly introduce the very elements of Earth's chaotic culture that had once led to their downfall. The first small change came in the form of office karaoke. Zedzer had been fascinated by the humans' ability to gather together, singing songs poorly yet passionately. They had witnessed it firsthand in New York City, and now, in the solitude of the archives, Zedzer recreated it. At first, it was just for themselves, an exercise in human interaction, a way to break the monotony. But soon, other diplomats, curious and confused, began to join in. They laughed awkwardly at first, but eventually, the camaraderie was undeniable. By the time Zedzer's quiet rebellion reached its peak, weekly karaoke sessions were a standard practice in the archives. With over 50 diplomats participating each cycle, it wasn't just about the singing, it was about the shared experience. The connections made over a song or a taco, the small, seemingly insignificant HFY ties that humans had mastered were now woven into the fabric of the Corps. But Zedzer's influence didn't stop there. Spontaneous brainstorming sessions, inspired by Earth's freeform creative vitae, replaced the old, rigid approaches to problem-solving. Diplomats began sharing lunch, discussing not just treaties but their favorite human foods, tacos, pizza, and even nachos, during meetings. Zedzer had begun to subtly transform the Corps from within. And as the archives transformed into a vibrant hub of creative vitae, it was clear that the old ways were already slipping away. Whether the Corps knew it or not, Earth's influence was now part of their very structure. And Zedzer, despite being relegated to the archives, was the architect of this quiet revolution. A year had passed since Zedzer Zirk's forced exile to the archives, and the Galactic Diplomatic Corps was not the same. The quiet revolution Zedzer had seeded within the sterile walls of the archive had grown in ways No one had anticipated. What had once been a place of rigid protocol and impersonal dealings had become a vibrant center of creative collaboration. The introduction of Earth's seemingly insignificant customs, karaoke, pizza, spontaneous meetings, had slowly transformed the Corps, and Zedzer had quietly guided it all. Zedzer, now officially a retired diplomat, watched as the Corps celebrated Earth's official designation as a special diplomatic zone. It was no longer a planet dismissed as chaotic and insignificant. Earth had proven, in its own way, to be a force that could not be ignored. Over the past 5 cycles, human culture had infiltrated diplomatic procedures to such an extent that the Corps' leaders no longer saw it as a weakness, but as a new form of diplomatic strength. Gone were the days of stilted, impersonal meetings where emotions were suppressed. Now, over 60 from of diplomatic discussions began with human-style icebreakers, humorous anecdotes, casual conversations over coffee, or the occasional game of chess. The Corps had even adopted Earth's social media to facilitate communication, a platform once deemed beneath galactic dignity. But the truth was undeniable. Earth's influence had made the diplomats more human, more connected to one another. Zedzer, retired in a quiet department focused on diplomatic innovation, stood at the window, watching a new generation of diplomats laughing over their tacos during a lunch break. It was a small thing, but it symbolized everything Earth had brought to the Corps: joy, connection, and spontaneity, values that had been absent from galactic diplomacy for millennia. Zedzer had made their peace with their new role. They were no longer a failure. Instead, they had quietly revolutionized an entire institution, proving that diplomacy could be fun and human. Earth's greatest gift had been its ability to teach the galaxy that even the most rigid systems could be transformed by laughter, food, and a willingness to embrace the unknown. As Zedzer looked out at the new era unfolding, they couldn't help but smile. Earth had won, in its own way, and, in doing so, so had they.